Hi and welcome back to today's video. We are going to sew this beautiful boat neck dress. It's called the Heloise Dress and it's one of my newest sewing patterns that will be released soon. The dress is fully lined, that means you need lining fabric, and for the shell fabric I can recommend lightweight fabrics like cotton or viscose. That is perfect for summer, but of course you could also make it out of denim or heavier materials. But one note right here, I am using a method that is called the burrito method later on in this video, and it is only suitable for lightweight fabrics. That's important. Even with my fabric, this method was not the easiest, just so you know right away, but I will adapt the sewing instructions so you will have the easiest method written there. Before we start sewing, here is the list of materials you will need. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Christina, a fashion design student, and I do sewing and design videos. Let's get started with the sewing process. First, I'm using some fusible bias tape for the center back seam, and I just press it onto the sewing line of the center back. I'm using the same bias tape for neckline and armhole, but there is also a different one that you can use that looks like this. It has a small stitching line that prevents the neckline from stretching out. I do that for the shell fabric pieces. You can skip the lining. So as you can see, I prepared all my pattern pieces and I also went ahead and searched all the dividing seams. The only thing I did not search is the neckline and armhole and also the hem, because we don't need to do that yet. So that's done and we can start with sewing the dividing seams. I will put the lining pieces aside for now. So for me, when it comes to sewing something that has multiple panels and everything kind of looks similar, it's easier to lay it out this way. So we have the front, the middle part of the front and the side piece for the front. Then it continues to the side back, middle piece and center back piece. That's how I'm also going to sew it on in this order. So I'm starting with the front piece. First, I pin the center front seam together and I just go ahead and sew that. And I press this seam open. For the other dividing seams, you could also press them towards the center front or for the back to the center back, but it just depends how you like it. I personally pressed every seam open. Just a tip for the area at the waist. Since there is a curve in the seam, it tends to crease at this point, so I like to iron each side separately. This way I can assure that it lays flat on each side and then you press it so you won't press any creases in it. And now I just continue to sew every dividing seam. So I'm taking my middle front piece and place it right sides together, pin it and make sure that the notches align, especially the one for the bust and waist. Just pin and sew. Same for the side front piece, pin and sew this one too and press the seams open, and I repeat the exact same steps for the back pieces, except for the center back. I leave the center back open for now because we need to insert a zipper. Once the shell pieces are all done, you can continue with the lining. We need to do the exact same steps, sewing the center front and all the dividing seams. For the lining, I pressed the seam allowance towards center back and center front. Next is the zipper. I personally like to do it now because all pattern pieces are still laying flat and are not combined at the shoulder and side seam. But of course, if you think you need to alter it a bit, it would also make sense to do the zipper last. It just depends on your workflow and how you like to adjust your garments. I planned to adjust it if needed at the side seams. First, I like to use some vanishing chalk to mark the center back seam. In this case, it's 1.5 centimeter because I like to have a bit of room for adjustment. I do that for both sides, and now it's also important to make sure that you mark your notches right there, because in my case I like to close the center back seam at the bottom now and not later. In my experience, the invisible zipper looks a bit cleaner this way. In general, I will show you my technique of inserting a zipper. If that is too confusing for you, I have a tutorial up that shows the standard method that you most likely find on YouTube and other sites. But I personally like to use this trick right here because the zipper will look a bit neater on the inside and the top edge of the neckline will also get a bit sharper. And here's how I do it. So we closed the bottom part of the center back seam and now it's time to insert the zipper to the center back. I unzip it and place the zipper right sides together to one side of the garment. The teeth should face the line that we just marked. I pin it and make sure that you have a distance of 1.2 or 1.3 centimeter at the top edge. I pin it all the way down, and once I'm at the bottom part, I like to flip one side of the back pieces to the other side so I can continue pinning my zipper at the already sewn area. Then I go ahead and sew it in place. I'm using a half zipper foot that looks like that. I don't have an invisible zipper foot, but if you have one, of course use it. It's easier, I guess, but I'm using this one. And then I go ahead and try to sew as close as I can to the zipper teeth. And yes, it kind of looks dangerous if I'm looking back at the footage. My fingernails are so close to the sewing needle, but yeah, I'm used to it, so it's okay, I won't hurt myself. As I approach the point where I already closed the center back seam, I try to sew as close as possible to that seam line. Once I've passed the beginning of it, I let the stitch line gently curve outward. Before I continue with the other side, I like to mark the notches at the zipper, especially the waistline notch. This way you can make sure once you pin the other side that it's at the same height, and once you close the zipper it looks neat. Pin the other side, making sure that you align the notches, and also remember to keep a distance of 1.2 or 1.3 at the top edge at the neckline, and just sew as we did before, very closely to the zipper teeth. I'm starting from the bottom since I didn't change my zipper foot. Remember to cut off all loose hanging threads so they won't get stuck in the zipper once you close it. Then it should look like this. The fabric looks flat and there are no creases or anything, so that's perfect. And then I go ahead and iron it carefully. Now I'm going to attach the lining to the center back. And for that I'm prepping it as I did before. I'm closing the center back seam at the bottom, but this time I mark 3 centimeters down from the notch. This way the lining has more room to move. Then I go ahead and close that seam and press the seam allowance open. Next I'm going back to the shell fabric. I place it on my table with the right side facing downwards, and then I place the lining on top of it, wrong sides together. This way I can determine which side needs to be sewn on each side. Then I flip one side to the other like so, and this way I know I need to pin it to the zipper. Then I just pin at the waist, open up the zipper and pin the remaining part. I pin from the right side because I also need to sew from the right side. And now comes the part that is a bit different from the standard method of inserting a zipper, because here I'm shifting the lining outward by 1 centimeter, and then I taper it back to the pinned area right here, and I will sew it on this way. When it comes to sewing it on, I use the previous seam line that you can still see as my guideline, and I sew with a distance of 0.5 centimeter. Then I bring it back to my table and I place the other side as we did before. Then I need to flip it and pin it to the zipper, and again I'm pinning from the right side, because if you didn't know, if you have a slippery fabric and one that is not slippery, always put the slippery one facing down. Your sewing machine transports the fabric that is facing down a bit quicker than the top fabric. When pinning the other side, remember to also shift the lining outward by a centimeter if you also want to do this method, and then I taper it back in and sew like we did before. This way you should also have a opening at the bottom right here. That's exactly what we need, and then I go ahead and slightly press using a piece of scrap fabric just to make sure that I don't melt the zipper by accident. Next, I'm going to close the shoulder seam, add lining and shelf fabric. I just place it right sides together and close it. I also make sure that the dividing seam aligns, and after sewing I just press the seam open. Now it's time to close the neckline, and for that I like to flip the shell front piece towards the back piece, and this way I can now in the lining to the front first, because for the back we need to do something different than you would usually do. So first pin the lining front to the front shell piece and then continue with the shoulder seam and make sure that those align too. We pinned the front piece to the lining, right sides together, and now let me explain how we are going to do this part right here at the back. That's the center back seam. Now we shifted the lining outwards by 1 centimeter because now I am not doing it like usual. Usually you would just lay it flat and now sew until you reach the corner and just backstitch and that's it. But we cannot do that now since we shifted the lining. We need to do the following step. So what I am going to do now is that I am folding all my seam allowance towards the lining, and I'm treating my zipper teeth, which are at this position right here, as my new fold line, which means I am using this as my fold line and just put everything towards the lining. I can show it from the lining side. That looks something like that. And now you also need to make sure that you hold it like that with the teeth being your fold line and pull a bit on the lining. I'm going to pin it now and I'm showing you what I mean, or how it should look like now. So now if you're taking a look inside the right side of both pieces, you can see that we shifted the zipper a bit, so the zipper is visible on the lining side. I think this makes more sense once it's sewn because you can actually see what happened. All my pins are not sharp enough, they are so dull and I always destroy my lining pieces with them. I need to get new ones, and if you have any recommendations for good pins that are not dull, please let me know. Okay, that's how the back piece looks pinned, and I'm going to pin the other side too so I can show you a second time what I did. This is our back piece, that's the lining currently facing up, and we need to again treat our zipper, which you can feel the zipper teeth need to be treated as our new fold line. And I just fold everything towards the lining. Now that's folded, but I still need to make sure that I pull on the lining. The lining will lay flat at the top as well. So now I'm going to sew all around the neckline. And now I'm going to trim and also clip into the seam allowance at curved areas. I'm leaving this part at the center back for now because we still need to check if we sewed it at the same height. And I trim about the half of it. So I'm also going to clip around the shoulder right here because we have a curve here too. And now I'm going to show you how it looks like from the right side. So I'm just go in like that and I fold the seam allowance downwards too, so the corner looks a bit neater. Then you can just turn it out like so. The lining at the neckline is almost done. That's how it looks like at the center back. Now the zipper is integrated into the lining. That's why we needed to shift it by a centimeter, because now it became a part of the lining. In my opinion, this way the lining also looks flatter and neater right here. That's why I do this method instead of the standard one. But of course, if that was a bit too confusing for you, you can always do the center back lining later. And as I told you, we also need to check if this is at the same height. So I'm going to close the zipper and just check if that looks good. And if it does, I am still going back in and cut the seam allowance so it's not as bulky. So I'm trimming that too. And now I'm going to understitch. I do that before I press anything, because now you can just go ahead and put the seam allowance towards the lining, and then you're going to sew on the lining side about 1 or 2 millimeters away from the seam line to secure the seam allowance. And I'm just going to do that all the way through. I'm showing you under my sewing machine. Now you can press everything flat, and while pressing, make sure that you don't stretch the neckline. It's almost time to do the armholes, but before we do that, we need to true the fabric at this step. That means that we are laying our piece flat. For example, I start with the front. I try to lay it flat as possible, and then I pin at the shoulder area first. I make sure to align the side seam and then just try to pin it to the shell fabric. Once you turn the shell side facing up, you can see that the lining sticks out a bit. We need to cut that away. It sticks out because we understitched the neckline, and this way the lining gets shifted a bit outward, and we need to cut it away so it won't peek out after we sew the armhole. Now we can sew the armhole, and I'm using the burrito method as mentioned, and here's how it works. I place my dress on the table with the front facing down and the back facing up. Then I open up the shoulder that we need to sew like this. I place the other shoulder part inside like so, and then I can go ahead and place the lining and shell right sides together at the shoulder area. This way the whole front and back piece gets sandwiched in between that seam. That also means while pinning you need to make sure to push the other part to the inside and that you don't pin it accidentally within the seam allowance. Now it should look like that, and you can just sew with your seam allowance, and after that I like to trim it and also clip in the curved areas. Now it's time to bring it back to the right side, and I recommend, if you use this method, to grab from the back so you can bring the front through this shoulder part, and you need to pull quite a bit and very tightly. And I noticed that even with my fabric, as I mentioned before, this method is not the easiest. That was not that easy to get it through the shoulder, and also the fabric kind of wrinkled a bit, and even after pressing it still doesn't look as flat as it did before anymore. So especially if you work with heavier fabrics, this method won't work. That's why I updated the written instructions a bit, so that's the easiest method for all kinds of fabrics, and I probably will make another video with the updated version. But yeah, in the end it still worked, so I guess it's fine if you want to try it too. And then I went ahead and pressed, and now it's time to close the side seam. I start by laying the front piece down with the outer fabric facing down and the lining facing up. Then I take the matching back piece and place the side seam of the outer fabric right sides together first. After that I pin the lining of front and back together as well. This way I can sew the entire side seam, outer fabric and lining in one go. I press the side seam open, and of course I also need to do that for the other side. I once again open front shell and lining piece up and place it right sides together with the back, and again just sew in one go and also press the seam allowance open. We are almost done. At this point you can try it on, do all the adjustments if needed, and also mark your final length. For me, I needed to shorten it by 1 centimeter. There are 3 centimeters of seam allowance at the hemline, but we don't need those actually. I just included those in case you're a bit taller or if you want the dress to be a bit longer, that's why it's there. But we actually just need 1 centimeter of seam allowance. That's why I'm going to cut away what I don't need. Of course, you also need to shorten the lining, and you need to shorten it by additional 2 or 3 centimeter. It needs to be shorter than your shell fabric, this way it won't peek out later. So we left 1 centimeter of seam allowance at the hem, and you could just double fold it like so with 5 millimeters. But you could also do a rolled hem, which is what I did, because this way the seam is less visible, and that's how it works. I fold about 7 millimeters up towards the inside of your garment, and I sew very closely to the folded edge. Then I go ahead and trim it, and I try to trim close to the sewing line. Then you can fold it up again and stitch very closely to the folded line. This way you have a hem that is just about 3 millimeters or so, and this way you won't notice it from the outside. For the lining, I just folded it twice with 5 millimeters because you won't see it anyway. And then just press everything flat. And we still need to do one more thing, which is to attach the lining to the shell fabric at the hem. First, I need to pin the lining to the shell part, and I do that by making sure that I measure 2 centimeters up, since that's the amount that I shortened the lining. Then I pin it in place. Once you've threaded your sewing needle and make a knot at the end, you can start by folding the lining up. Then insert the needle within the seam allowance of the shell fabric. That's the center back I'm currently working at. Next, with one hand you need to form a loop, and with the other hand you just hold your thread. And now with the hand that created the loop, you need to take the thread from the other hand and pull it through the loop. At the same time you create a new loop and open it up again with your hand. Go back to the thread, pull again through the loop and create a new loop. This is how you do the chain stitch. I do that a couple of times until I reach a length of 3 centimeters. And lastly, you need to take your needle and pull it through the loop to secure your chain stitch. And with that, you need to sew it onto your lining within the seam allowance. Try to go for the same height. This way your lining will not ride up and it's secured. It still has room to move around. It's just important to do it so you won't have to pull your lining each time you put on your garment. I recommend to do that for the center back, center front and the side seams. 4 points should be enough. If you don't want to use the chain stitch, you could also just stitch back and forth and leave the thread a bit longer. That's also totally fine. Now the dress is completely finished. Give it a last good press and let's go over to the reveal. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Let me know in the comments down below how you liked that dress, and if you're interested I will link the pattern in the description. It's the first link, and if it's not there yet, that might be because it's currently in a testing phase. If you want to be a pattern tester for future patterns, follow me on Instagram. You will get notified once I'm searching for new pattern testers again. And also if you want to stay up to date when this pattern releases, also follow me on Instagram or TikTok. If you like sewing and design videos, you can also subscribe to my channel. That's the easiest way to support me, and I hope we see each other next time. Bye guys!